Most people believe they understand money because they've handled it their whole lives. They've earned it, spent it, saved a little, lost a little. They assume the mechanics are simple. Make more than you spend. Don't waste. Be smart. But if it were that simple, why do so many who earn well still feel trapped? Why do people with identical incomes end up in completely different financial realities 10 years later? This content is for educational purposes only, not financial advice. The truth is, money doesn't behave the way most people think it does. It doesn't simply obey logic or discipline. It responds to something deeper. Something most of us never examine. It responds to the silent agreements we make with ourselves about what we deserve, what feels safe, and what we're willing to delay. Consider two people. Both earn the same salary. Both say they want financial security. One of them, without fanfare or exceptional intelligence, quietly builds wealth over 20 years. The other works just as hard, sometimes harder, and remains perpetually behind. The difference isn't luck. It's not inheritance. It's not even about cutting out coffee or side hustles. It's about a single, repeating pattern that happens in the mind before it ever shows up in the bank account. Most people treat money as something that arrives and then disappears. It comes in. It goes out. The cycle repeats. There's a kind of resignation built into this rhythm. An assumption that this is just how it works. But some people see money differently. Not as a current, but as a seed. They don't ask, how much can I spend? They ask, how much can I keep, and put to work? That shift sounds small. Almost trivial. But it changes everything. Because once you start seeing money as something that multiplies rather than something that depletes, your entire relationship with it transforms. You stop feeling deprived when you save. You stop resenting the future for stealing from the present. You begin to realize that wealth isn't built by grand gestures or windfalls. It's built by a quiet, consistent choice made over and over again in moments no one else sees. The ancient world understood this better than we do now. Not through spreadsheets or investment apps, but through principles. Principles that didn't rely on markets or technology. Principles that worked whether you lived in a mud brick city 4,000 years ago or a high-rise apartment today. And the first principle, the one that everything else rests on, is this: a portion of what you earn must never leave your hands. Not because you're greedy. Not because you don't deserve to enjoy your labor. But because that portion represents something more important than enjoyment. It represents your future freedom. The people who grasp this early don't feel like they're sacrificing. They feel like they're protecting something. And that protection becomes automatic. Invisible. Woven into who they are. The ones who don't grasp it spend decades wondering why wealth always feels just out of reach, even when they're doing everything they've been told to do. The simplest rules are often the hardest to live by. Not because they're complicated, but because they ask you to behave differently than everyone around you. Paying yourself first sounds obvious. Almost boring. Set aside a portion of every dollar before you spend the rest. Let that portion grow untouched. But watch what happens when someone tries to do it. Immediately, a feeling rises. A tightness. A quiet panic that whispers, what if I need that money? Even if they don't need it. Even if their bills are covered. The act of keeping money, of not immediately putting it into circulation, feels like deprivation. That feeling is old. Older than logic. It comes from a place that equates spending with safety. Because for most of human history, resources were scarce. You used what you had. You didn't store grain you couldn't eat or save tools you couldn't use. But money is different. Money doesn't rot. It multiplies. And yet, the instinct remains. Most people can't shake the belief that saving feels like losing. Consider two people. Both 30 years old. Both earning $60,000 a year. Both living in similar apartments, driving similar cars, buying similar things. One of them decides to pay herself first. 10%. $600 a month. She doesn't announce it. Doesn't make it complicated. Just moves the money before she pays anything else. The other plans to do the same. He genuinely intends to. But he tells himself he'll save whatever's left at the end of the month. 5 years pass. The woman now has nearly $40,000 set aside, quietly compounding. She didn't feel deprived. She adjusted. Her lifestyle fit around the new reality. The man has about $1,200. Some months were good. Most weren't. There was always something. A repair. A trip. A moment of weakness. He didn't fail because he lacked discipline. He failed because he was waiting for permission from his circumstances. And circumstances never give permission. This is where most advice about money falls apart. It treats saving as a mechanical task. A matter of willpower or budgeting apps. But it's not mechanical. It's emotional. The real question isn't whether you can afford to save. It's whether you can afford to see yourself as someone who does. Because paying yourself first requires a shift in identity. It requires you to believe that your future self is real. That the person you'll be in 10 years deserves protection. That they're not some distant stranger you'll worry about later. Most people don't see it that way. They see the present as vivid and urgent. The future as hazy and theoretical. So they spend now. They comfort now. They reward now. And the future version of them inherits the consequences. The people who build wealth aren't smarter. They're not more motivated. They've simply made a different choice about who matters. They've decided that the version of themselves arriving 10 years from now is just as real as the one sitting here today. And they act accordingly. That's the shift. Not discipline. Not sacrifice. Just a quiet rearrangement of loyalty. Once that rearrangement happens, saving stops feeling like deprivation. It starts feeling like protection. Like building a wall between yourself and chaos. And the amount, at first, doesn't even matter. What matters is the repetition. The rhythm. The fact that it happens every single time, without negotiation. Because consistency is what trains the mind to accept a new reality. And once the mind accepts it, the behavior becomes automatic. The question then becomes, how much is enough to set aside, and why does the steadiness of that choice matter more than the size of it? Most people sabotage themselves before they even begin. They sit down with good intentions. They want to save. They're ready to commit. And then they ask the question that quietly destroys everything. How much should I save? Not because they're curious. But because they're looking for permission to aim lower, or an excuse to wait until they can aim higher. They want the perfect number. The amount that feels responsible but not restrictive. Meaningful but not painful. And while they're searching for that number, months pass. Years pass. Nothing gets saved. Because the perfect amount doesn't exist. What exists is the amount you can repeat. Over and over. Without drama. Without negotiation. That's the only number that matters. People overestimate the power of big, heroic actions. They imagine that wealth is built in bursts. One large decision. One perfect investment. One windfall that changes everything. But wealth doesn't work that way. Wealth is built in the repetition of small, unremarkable choices that no one notices until years later. Consider two people. Both decide to start saving. One of them saves aggressively when he can. Some months, he puts away $1,000. Other months, nothing. He tells himself he's doing well. He's trying. Life just gets complicated sometimes. The other saves $250. Every single month. No exceptions. No renegotiation. It's automatic. It happens whether she feels like it or not. 10 years pass. The aggressive saver has about $30,000. Some years were good. Some weren't. There were gaps. Emergencies. Moments when it didn't feel possible. The consistent saver has nearly $40,000. Plus interest. Plus compounding. Plus the psychological momentum that comes from never breaking the pattern. Same income. Same life circumstances. Different outcome. Not because one tried harder. But because one removed the need to try at all. Consistency doesn't require willpower. It requires a decision made once and then automated. A rhythm that becomes so normal you forget it's even happening. That's the shift most people miss. They think discipline means constantly resisting temptation. Constantly choosing the hard thing. But real discipline is setting up your life so the hard thing becomes the default. So you never have to choose it again. When you decide on an amount and make it non-negotiable, something changes. The mental energy you used to spend debating whether to save, how much to save, if this month is different, all of that disappears. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop weighing options. You just move forward. And in that space, something quiet begins to grow. Not excitement. Not motivation. Just trust. Trust that you're the kind of person who does what they said they'd do. Trust that future outcomes are being built right now, in silence, without fanfare. That trust is worth more than any single large deposit. Because it compounds too. The person who saves irregularly never fully believes they're a saver. They're always starting over. Always proving it to themselves again. The person who saves consistently doesn't have to prove anything. They already know who they are. And over time, that identity becomes unshakable. This is why the exact amount barely matters. 5%, 10%, 15%. Pick one. Commit. Let it run. Because the real work isn't in the choosing. It's in the not choosing. In letting the system exist without interference. Wealth grows best when it's ignored. When it's allowed to sit quietly in the background, compounding while you live your life. No drama. No tracking every fluctuation. No second guessing. Just time, passing. And a rhythm, repeating. That's all it takes. Building wealth is only half the challenge. Keeping it is where most people fail. Not because they spend recklessly. Not because they lose discipline. But because once they see progress, something shifts. They begin to feel impatient. The steady rhythm that got them here suddenly feels too slow. The modest returns feel insufficient. They start looking for ways to speed things up. And that's when they become vulnerable. Greed doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with flashing lights or obvious warnings. It disguises itself as opportunity, as intelligence, as the chance to be ahead of everyone else. It whispers, "You've been patient long enough. Now it's time to make real money." And the person who resisted 1,000 small temptations along the way suddenly finds themselves considering something they would have dismissed a year earlier. A friend mentions an investment. Returns are high. The details are vague, but the confidence is convincing. Others are getting in. It feels like the moment to act. Or a platform promises returns far beyond what savings accounts or index funds could ever offer. The opportunity won't last. The window is closing. The pressure builds. Not from logic, but from fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of staying ordinary while others get ahead. Consider someone who spent 3 years saving carefully. Month after month, the same amount set aside. No drama. No shortcuts. Slowly, steadily, the balance grew. Then he hears about an opportunity. A business venture. A crypto project. A stock tip from someone who seems to know what they're doing. The promise is a 30% return in 6 months. Maybe more. He hesitates. But the hesitation feels like doubt. Like fear. Like the kind of thinking that keeps people stuck. So he moves half his savings into it. 3 months later, it's gone. Not because he was foolish. Not because he didn't research. But because he mistook speed for strategy. He mistook excitement for wisdom. Meanwhile, someone else heard the same pitch. Felt the same pull. But made a different choice. She ignored it. Not because she was smarter. But because she understood something deeper. That wealth isn't built by catching the right moment. It's built by avoiding the wrong ones. She kept her money where it was. Boring. Safe. Compounding at a pace that felt unremarkable. 5 years later, she's still building. He's still recovering. This is the part no one talks about. The part that doesn't fit into success stories or motivational content. That most financial loss doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from the need to feel clever. From the belief that patience is for people who don't know better. That real wealth requires bold moves and insider knowledge. But the truth is simpler. And harder to accept. Wealth survives by staying out of situations it doesn't fully understand. By avoiding promises that sound too good. By recognizing that if something requires urgency, it's probably designed to bypass reason. The people who protect their wealth don't do it by being paranoid. They do it by being skeptical of their own excitement. They know that the feeling of missing out is just a feeling. That opportunities will always present themselves. That the real opportunity is staying stable long enough for time to work. Because time doesn't reward aggression. It rewards durability. The money that compounds the longest isn't the money chased hardest. It's the money kept safest. Not locked away in fear. But placed in environments that are predictable. Stable. Resistant to sudden loss. That's not exciting. It doesn't make for good stories. But it works. And the longer you protect what you've built, the more you realize that the goal was never to outsmart the system. It was to outlast the mistakes. To still be standing when others have cycled through gains and losses and started over again. Wealth isn't clever. It's careful. And that carefulness, over decades, becomes the most valuable asset of all. Most people misunderstand what wealth is actually for. They imagine it as a finish line. A number that signals arrival. A lifestyle that proves something to the world. But that's not what wealth does. Wealth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It works quietly, in the background, doing something far more valuable than status. It removes fear. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But slowly, over time, the constant hum of financial anxiety begins to fade. The decision to take a sick day stops being a calculation. The broken appliance stops being a crisis. The unexpected expense stops derailing the month. And in that absence of panic, something else emerges. Choice. Not the kind of choice that comes from abundance or excess. But the kind that comes from stability. From knowing that the ground beneath you is solid. You can say no to work that drains you. You can say yes to time that matters. You can make decisions based on what feels right, not what feels necessary. That's what wealth actually buys. Not things. Not luxury. But the ability to move through life without being constantly pushed by circumstances. Consider someone 20 years after they started. They still work. They still live modestly. Nothing about their life looks extraordinary from the outside. But on a Tuesday morning, they wake up without an alarm. They make coffee slowly. They sit with it. There's no urgency. No dread. No mental accounting of what today will cost or what next month demands. Their child asks for help with something small. They say yes without checking the clock. Later, a friend invites them somewhere last minute. They go. Not because they have nothing else to do. But because they can afford the spontaneity. These moments don't feel dramatic. They don't photograph well. But they're the entire point. Because wealth, real wealth, doesn't change what you have. It changes what you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about the gap between paychecks. You don't have to perform desperation in negotiations. You don't have to stay in situations that diminish you just because leaving feels financially impossible. And that freedom, that quiet autonomy, is worth more than any possession. People chase wealth because they think it will make them feel powerful. But power isn't what it gives you. Peace is. The peace of knowing that you've built something that doesn't require constant attention. That your decisions years ago are still protecting you now. That the version of yourself who chose patience over immediacy made the right call. And the strangest part. Once you reach that place, you stop thinking about money at all. It's just there. Stable. Reliable. Doing its job in the background while you do yours. You're not richer in the way the world measures richness. You're just less burdened. You move differently. You breathe differently. You stop performing. You stop justifying. You simply exist, without the weight of financial fear shaping every choice. That's the real return. Not percentages or projections. But time. Your time. Owned by you. The ability to spend a Sunday doing nothing and not feeling guilty. The ability to help someone you care about without resenting the cost. The ability to walk away from anything that no longer serves you. These aren't luxuries. They're what wealth was always supposed to provide. Not escape. Not status. Just the quiet, unremarkable freedom to live without being controlled by money. And the people who understand that early, who build toward it patiently, without flash or fanfare, end up with something most people spend their whole lives searching for. Not wealth. Just peace. And in the end, that might be the only thing worth building toward at all. The most powerful effects of wealth are invisible. They don't show up in what you buy or where you live. They show up in how you move through the world. In the decisions you make when no one is watching. In the conversations you have when pressure builds. In the moments where most people feel forced to react, and you realize you don't have to. Money changes how you behave long before it changes what you own. It doesn't make you kinder or wiser. It doesn't improve your character. But it removes something that distorts character. It removes desperation. And once desperation is gone, you begin to see how much of your life was shaped by it. How many jobs you stayed in because leaving felt impossible. How many relationships you tolerated because disruption felt expensive. How many conversations you avoided because saying what you meant felt too risky. Financial security doesn't give you courage. It just stops punishing honesty. Consider someone sitting in a meeting. The boss is dismissive. Condescending. Speaking to them in a way that quietly erodes dignity. Years ago, they would have absorbed it. Smiled. Nodded. Stayed silent. Because the cost of speaking up felt too high. But now, something is different. Not because they suddenly became brave. But because they know they have options. They know that walking away wouldn't destroy them. That saying, "I don't accept being spoken to that way," wouldn't leave them scrambling. So they say it. Calmly. Without aggression. Without drama. And the dynamic shifts. Not because of the words themselves. But because the words came from a place of choice, not survival. That's what money does. It turns reactions into choices. Most people spend their lives reacting. Reacting to bills. Reacting to demands. Reacting to pressure from others who assume compliance is guaranteed. But wealth, even modest wealth, creates distance between stimulus and response. It creates the space to pause. To consider. To decide what actually serves you. And in that space, everything changes. You stop saying yes out of fear. You stop agreeing to things that diminish you just to keep the peace. You stop performing gratitude for opportunities that barely meet your needs. You're not harder. You're not colder. You're just clearer. Because clarity requires stillness. And stillness requires the absence of panic. The person who needs the next paycheck immediately can't afford to be clear. They can't afford to wait for better terms. They can't afford to walk away from something wrong just because it's financially convenient. But the person who has built stability can. They can negotiate without desperation. They can set boundaries without apology. They can let opportunities pass because they trust that others will come. That patience, that ability to wait, is a form of power most people never experience. Not because they lack discipline. But because they're always operating from a position of need. And need makes everything urgent. It turns small inconveniences into crises. It turns reasonable requests into non-negotiable demands. Stability does the opposite. It turns crises into problems. Problems into tasks. Tasks into choices. It doesn't eliminate difficulty. But it changes how difficulty feels. The car breaks down. It's frustrating. But it's not catastrophic. You handle it and move on. Someone asks for a favor that doesn't serve you. You decline. Politely. Firmly. Without guilt. A job offer arrives that pays more but costs more of your life. You turn it down. Because you can afford to value your time more than their money. These moments don't look like wealth. They don't photograph well. But they accumulate. And over time, they shape a life that feels fundamentally different. Not louder. Not flashier. Just quieter. More deliberate. More yours. Because wealth, real wealth, doesn't announce itself in possessions. It announces itself in the absence of panic. In the ability to pause before deciding. In the knowledge that urgency is often manufactured, and you no longer have to perform it. True power isn't controlling outcomes. It's controlling your response to them. And that control, built slowly over years of patient decisions, becomes the most valuable thing money ever buys. Money tends to follow certain types of people. Not the smartest. Not the most aggressive. Not even the most skilled. It follows those who can be trusted with time. People who don't panic when progress slows. Who don't abandon plans when circumstances shift. Who understand that wealth isn't built in moments, but across decades. And the strange thing is, these people rarely talk about wealth at all. They just move through life with a kind of steadiness that others notice. A reliability that compounds quietly in the background. Because time rewards patience. And it punishes impatience more severely than it punishes ignorance. You can recover from not knowing. You can learn. You can adjust. But impatience destroys opportunities before they fully form. It burns bridges. It sacrifices long-term value for short-term relief. And once that pattern establishes itself, money becomes harder to hold. Not because it's scarce. But because trust evaporates. Consider someone who has worked in the same field for 15 years. Not the most talented person in the room. Not the one with the flashiest ideas. But the one who shows up. Who follows through. Who doesn't overpromise or underdeliver. When a problem arises, people call them. When a partnership forms, they're considered. When a decision needs to be made, their opinion carries weight. Not because they campaigned for it. But because over time, their character became undeniable. They didn't chase opportunities. Opportunities found them. Because reputation is a form of capital. And like all capital, it compounds. Every kept promise adds to it. Every moment of restraint when others panic adds to it. Every decision to prioritize long-term relationships over short-term wins adds to it. And eventually, without announcement or ceremony, doors begin to open that were never advertised. Investors who want stability. Partners who value reliability. Clients who are tired of chaos and just want someone they can trust. None of this happens quickly. And that's the point. The people who think in decades behave differently today. They don't burn relationships for marginal gains. They don't cut corners to save time. They don't lie to avoid discomfort. Not because they're morally superior. But because they've done the math. A reputation takes years to build and minutes to destroy. And once destroyed, the cost of rebuilding it is far higher than the benefit of whatever shortcut seemed appealing in the moment. So they choose the longer path. The one that requires patience. The one that doesn't offer immediate validation. And over time, that choice separates them from nearly everyone else. Because most people can't wait. Most people need the win now. The recognition now. The return now. They make decisions that feel smart in isolation but erode trust over time. They optimize for the quarter, not the decade. And wealth, real wealth, doesn't flow toward that kind of thinking. It flows toward the person who can sit in a meeting and say, "I don't know yet. Let me think about it." Toward the person who turns down a lucrative offer because something about it feels misaligned. Toward the person who keeps their word even when it's inconvenient. These aren't dramatic choices. They don't make headlines. But they accumulate. And the accumulation is what matters. Because wealth isn't just money. It's access. It's trust. It's the knowledge that when you speak, people listen. When you commit, people believe you. When you move, others want to move with you. That kind of influence doesn't come from intelligence or strategy. It comes from character. From the willingness to behave in ways that don't pay off immediately but prove invaluable over time. And the person who understands that, who internalizes it early, ends up in a position most people never reach. Not because they were smarter. But because they were willing to wait. To build slowly. To let their actions speak across years instead of weeks. Money doesn't chase brilliance. It chases reliability. And the people who can be trusted not to panic, not to shortcut, not to abandon their principles under pressure, those are the ones it stays with longest. Because character compounds the same way money does. Slowly. Quietly. And then all at once. The most important money decisions are the ones whose effects appear long after the decision maker is gone. Not the trade that pays off next quarter. Not the investment that doubles in 5 years. But the quiet, unremarkable choices that shape what remains decades later. Most people can't think that far ahead. Their horizon ends at retirement. Maybe at their children's independence. Rarely beyond. But some people think differently. They make decisions as if the world will continue without them. As if money isn't theirs to spend, but theirs to steward. And that shift in perspective changes everything. Because when you think generationally, short-term opportunities lose their urgency. Risks become less appealing. The need to maximize every dollar fades. What replaces it is something calmer. Something more deliberate. A recognition that wealth meant to last must be treated gently. Consider someone managing a modest inheritance. Not millions. Just enough to matter. They could spend it. Invest aggressively. Try to turn it into something larger, faster. But they don't. Instead, they preserve it. They choose safety over growth. Stability over excitement. They put it somewhere boring. Somewhere predictable. Somewhere that won't double overnight but also won't disappear. Years pass. Decades pass. Their children don't notice. There's no ceremony. No announcement. Just a quiet foundation that allows certain decisions to be made without panic. A grandchild can finish school without debt. A medical emergency doesn't destroy the family. A period of unemployment doesn't spiral into catastrophe. None of this traces back to a single brilliant move. It traces back to restraint. To the willingness to prioritize continuity over personal gain. That's what legacy thinking does. It transforms wealth from a prize into a responsibility. And people who see it that way behave differently. They don't chase. They don't gamble. They don't treat money as proof of their intelligence or status. They treat it as something borrowed from the future. Something that doesn't fully belong to them. And in doing so, they avoid the mistakes that destroy most fortunes. Because wealth rarely vanishes in a single catastrophic event. It erodes. Slowly. Through a series of small, impatient decisions made by people who forgot they were temporary. A reckless investment. A needless risk. A desire to prove something. A refusal to accept that not every opportunity is worth taking. Each decision seems justified in the moment. But over time, they accumulate. And what could have lasted generations disappears within one. The people who avoid this understand something fundamental. That money doesn't care about ambition. It doesn't reward boldness or cleverness. It rewards patience. Restraint. The ability to let something grow without interference. And the longer your time horizon, the easier that becomes. Because when you're planning for 50 years instead of 5, the daily fluctuations stop mattering. The need to optimize every percentage point fades. The temptation to act decisively just to feel productive dissolves. You begin to see wealth for what it actually is. Not a tool for self-expression. Not a scorecard. Not a measure of your worth. Just a quiet force that, if handled carefully, can reduce suffering and create options long after you're gone. That's not glamorous. It doesn't fit the stories people tell about success. But it's durable. And durability, over long enough timelines, becomes the only thing that matters. The families that stay wealthy across generations don't do so through genius. They do so through caution. Through the willingness to prioritize stability over growth. Through the understanding that money is easier to protect than to rebuild. And the individuals who internalize this, even without vast sums, create something more valuable than wealth. They create continuity. A foundation that doesn't crumble when pressure arrives. A buffer that absorbs shocks without collapsing. A quiet assurance that the people who come after them won't have to start from nothing. That's the gift of long-term thinking. Not control. Not legacy in the traditional sense. Just the knowledge that you handled something carefully enough that it could continue. Wealth meant to last moves slowly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, quietly compounding, in the hands of those who understand that the longest plans require the softest touch. And time, patient and indifferent, rewards that understanding above all else. Most people spend their lives chasing money without ever stopping to ask what money is actually meant to give them. They assume the answer is obvious. Security. Comfort. Freedom. But those are just words. Abstractions that feel true until you try to define them. The real answer is simpler. And quieter. Money is meant to give you time that belongs to you. Days that move at your pace. Choices made without pressure. It's not meant to make life perfect. It's meant to make life calmer. And that calmness, that absence of constant urgency, is worth more than anything money can buy. Consider someone decades into this practice. They never became wealthy in the way the world defines it. No mansion. No luxury. No headlines. But on a Thursday morning, they wake naturally. No alarm. No dread. They make coffee slowly. Sit with it. Watch light move across the room. There's no schedule demanding their attention. No panic about what comes next. No mental calculation of whether they can afford this moment of stillness. Later, a friend calls with an invitation. Last minute. Inconvenient by most standards. They say yes. Not because they have nothing else to do, but because they can. The day unfolds without force. Without performance. Just presence. These aren't the moments people photograph. They don't make for compelling stories. But they're the entire point. Because wealth, real wealth, doesn't change what you have. It changes what you don't have to endure. You don't have to endure jobs that diminish you. Relationships that survive only through financial dependency. Decisions made in fear rather than clarity. You don't have to perform gratitude for opportunities that barely meet your needs. You don't have to say yes when you mean no. You don't have to move faster than feels right just to keep up. Money doesn't remove difficulty. It doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't solve the deeper questions of meaning or purpose. But it does something just as valuable. It removes desperation. And in the absence of desperation, you begin to see who you actually are. What you actually value. What you're willing to protect and what you're ready to release. You stop optimizing for survival and start living for alignment. Not in grand gestures. Not in dramatic reinventions. Just in the quiet accumulation of days that feel like yours. Days where the primary emotion isn't anxiety. Where choice exists not as theory, but as lived reality. That's what the principles were always about. Not wealth for its own sake. Not status or comparison. Not the ability to outspend or outperform. Just the slow, patient construction of a life where money stops being the main character. Where it exists in the background, stable and reliable, doing its job without demanding attention. And the person who built it, who made the unsexy choices year after year, who resisted shortcuts and stayed the course, gets to experience something most people never do. Not luxury. Not excess. Just peace. The peace of knowing that tomorrow won't undo today. That an unexpected expense won't trigger a crisis. That the ground beneath them is solid. They're not richer than everyone else.